Make this the best Halloween ever by pre-ordering my 2 brand new books coming out soon. The first is Phantom Phenomena, a hand-picked collection of the all-time scariest stories I've ever received, accompanied by atmospheric illustrations and field notes. Then there's Appalachian Folklore, an extraordinary catalog of the chilling history, creepy folklore, and rich culture of the Appalachians. These release October 15th and 8th, respectively. Pre-order now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But hurry, because the first 100 pre-orders to verify via the link in the description or at eeriecast.com/verify will receive an exclusive hoodie and hardcover copy of Lore, a folklore horror novel. Completely off topic here, but do I have any Warhammer 40k fans in my audience? I just read the first 3 Horus Heresy novels in a single week. It's awesome. But anyway, today's episode brings us supernatural and bizarre encounters in and around the woods. Welcome everyone back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. Send me your tales of the unexplained at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. Comment below and let me know which stories you enjoyed the most, and which topics you want to hear next. If you like what you hear, be sure to leave a rating of Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple, and subscribe to Darkness Prevails on YouTube if you haven't already. Now, let's begin. Four Horsemen, from Nadineamber. This story took place around 1989 and 1990. I grew up in a very small town, about an hour north of San Francisco, along the Russian River. There was never much to do around there for those under 21, so when my parents went out of town, I had parties at my house. Lots of people, loud music, and alcohol. What else are kids supposed to do in the sticks? Well, I lived far enough off main roads that people often had a hard time finding the house. I wasn't going to ever share this story, as it seemed so fantastical that no one would believe me. But my best friend experienced this too. One such night around midnight, I guess, or bar time, maybe 2:15 a.m., my bestie and I went to meet a friend and headed over to the nearest main crossroad. We got to the meetup spot early. I'd like to state that when I had parties, I never drank. I stayed sober and took everyone's keys. It's too dangerous to drink and drive anywhere. But out here, it's not just an accident. It's twisted metal around redwood trees. Anyway, we sat there in the dark waiting for our friend. Looking up the road toward the highway, waiting for the telltale headlight glow that would signal they were coming over the hill soon. As I watched, I saw something moving. I dismissed it as trees, but there was no wind. As I looked up the road, for reference, the top of the hill is approximately 0.5 miles from where we were waiting, I saw figures, very large figures at the top. They weren't just tall, they towered over the trees, eliminating the possibility it was trees themselves I was seeing. They were taller than the apple trees and above the few redwoods that grew near the highway. One figure looked to be a leader figure, with a big hat, broad shoulders, and a long trench coat or duster. The other figures moved in unison with him. Honestly, all I could think of was Kurt Russell in Tombstone, with them all walking together to the OK Corral. If they were 15 to 20 feet tall and solid black, that is. I watched as they crested the hill and started down, toward where we were waiting. I looked at my bestie and noticed she was staring intently in the same direction. I spoke up, saying, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" She replied, "I don't know. Do you see a few huge men coming this way?" "Yep, looks like Wyatt Earp and the gang," I said. About halfway from the top of the hill to where we sat, there was a small intersecting road. We agreed if they reached that road, we were out of there, friend or no friend. It was a few seconds, and they hit that road. We took off back to my house, trembling. I think about this event often. I don't share it because of these circumstances. Middle of the night, a big party. I figure people would say I was high or drunk, which I was not. Plus, we both saw it. I speak to this particular friend on occasion, and it always comes up. Neither of us have forgotten that night, and both of us wonder who or what the heck they were. I figure they were the 4 horsemen, but why in the world would they be there? What did they want, and why could we both see them? I later joined the military and left this small town for several years. Now I'm back, living in the same house. My mother lives in a small unit next door that we built. I've never seen them again, but I'm also in my 50s now, and being out after 10 p.m. isn't as appealing as it was when I was 19. My youngest son, now the age I was when it happened, is having his own experiences in the house that scare him. I, however, have no more experiences. I don't know if it's related or not, but maybe we are just a light for the other side. I heard someone share a similar story the other day and thought, oh my god, they saw what I saw. Perhaps not as tall, but the explanation was exactly what I saw. So I finally decided to share. East Tennessee Getaway Nightmare from Southern Fisher 777. My wife and I go camping every year for her birthday. We love getting away up in the numerous mountains here in Tennessee. It's a beautiful state, with plenty of breathtaking sights to see. We prefer tent camping. Campers seem like they defeat the purpose of being one with nature. We'd planned a 4-day camping trip. We reserved our campsite in advance and got there early. Setting up camp went fine and everything was perfect for the first 2 days. Cooking on the fire, roasting s'mores, fishing, and swimming. We were having a great time. Things didn't get weird until the 3rd day. We woke that morning just before sunrise to a howling noise. Now, I'm a good old boy raised on a farm, been hunting my whole life. Not much scares me, and I knew there were no animals big enough here, especially canine, to make that noise. My wife was scared, though, but I assured her it was just some dumb teenagers pranking the campers. The day went on as it should have. We ate breakfast, went swimming, and hiked around the lake on the 3.5-mile trail that circled it. Usual camper stuff. That night, I decided to go night fishing. I'd seen some good-sized fish splash on our way back at sunset, and being an avid fisherman, I wanted it. I told my wife of my plan, and for the first time, she told me not to go. "Please don't go by yourself tonight. I have a really bad feeling about it," she said, a look of fear overcoming her. I smiled to reassure her and said, "Baby, come on now. Afraid something's gonna get me? I'll bring the gun if it makes you feel better." Her face still hadn't dropped that look of fear. What if that thing that howled was a bear or something? I just don't want anything to happen to you. I laughed and replied, "Babe, I've lived here my whole life. Bears don't howl, and there aren't any wolves out here. Coyotes don't get that big either, and they don't howl like that. It was just some stupid teens." We went back and forth a few more times before she finally let me go, after making me promise to bring the pistol with me. I checked my tackle box, making sure my pole was ready for bottom fishing. I made sure I brought my flashlight and my good knife too. I headed out to the trail that circled the lake. The moon was nice and bright, so I didn't need to use my flashlight to see where I was going. I made my way until I saw the perfect fishing spot, a part jutting out into the lake covered by trees. But the moonlight hit it perfectly at the exposed end. I set up my chair and cast my line out. As time passed, I caught a few catfish, but none the size of the one I'd seen earlier. I had just finished getting one off the hook and tossed him back into the water when I heard it. My blood ran cold. Goosebumps covered my whole body as a howl so loud it caused my ears to ring, pierced the silence of the night. The fishing pole hit the ground as my hands began to shake. What could have made that noise? Was it some dumb teens again? No, the woods were quiet now. Signs of a large predator nearby. But the only large predators up here were black bears. No possible way a bear would howl like that. I heard rustling maybe 40 feet behind me towards the trail, and instinctively I grabbed my 9mm from the holster. My hands were shaking. Why was I so afraid? Hardly anything scared me. Then, in the direction the rustling had come from, I saw eyes, yellowish eyes. I locked into its gaze. I shouted, "Hey, I'm armed. I'd suggest you move along. I'm not afraid of you, and you may get yourself shot trying to scare me." Nothing. No movement. The eyes just stayed locked in my direction. I readied the gun, prepared to fire on whatever this thing was. I lined it up in my sights and gave a final warning. "I'm gonna shoot if you don't announce yourself now." No reply yet again. At this point, I realized it was not a person. No teenagers were pranking me. I'd been targeted by some type of predator. So I squeezed the trigger. Click. My whole body went stiff. I'd left in such a hurry to try and catch that stupid fish, I hadn't checked to see if the gun was even loaded. It was empty. I looked up from the gun, back to where the eyes were, and they were gone. I hiked about 2.5 miles down the trail. It would be quicker to just finish the trail than go back the way I came. I loaded my stuff up quickly. I walked just as fast as I could to get back onto the path, praying that the predator wasn't behind a tree or a bush just waiting for me. My stomach was in knots. Something was off with whatever this was. It wasn't natural. I heard a loud crash in the woods to my left, the unnatural silence of the forest broken by it. It must have been huge. Whatever had made the noise, it sounded like a tree had fallen. Something told me to run. Run as fast as I can and don't look back. Didn't have to tell me twice. I dropped all my fishing gear and ran. I heard heavy footsteps following behind me, but I refused to look back. I ran and ran. Having played football my whole life, I had good stamina and was pretty fast. This thing was faster than I was. The steps got louder and louder. I could hear what sounded like a dog panting getting closer and closer. And then there, the dam. You could walk across it, and it was fenced in, about 2.5 feet wide and 7 feet tall. Much too small for whatever this thing was to get into. I was at my limit, but there was only maybe 100 feet till I made it to the dam. I would be safe there. I dove into the dam walkway and crashed onto the concrete, quickly glancing behind me. I saw it then. Must have been 6 or 7 feet tall, easily. Huge build, covered in fur. Its arms reaching for me between the walkway's fencing, but it had no chance of fitting through. Its face was like a wolf's, but more man-like. Its piercing eyes were full of malice and hate towards me. I had escaped it, and it was more than displeased with that fact. Its snout had blood and flesh hanging from it, its teeth stained red. I yelled as loud as I could, calling for help. The thing snarled at me and stopped reaching towards me, letting out a terrible howl. My ears rang, and my body trembled. It was so loud I thought my eardrums were going to burst. Then it gave me one last look and leapt into the trees. I heard the rustling fade as it made its way deeper into the forest. I spent the night in that walkway, praying to Jesus to protect me the entire night until some rangers found me early in the morning doing their rounds. They asked me what I was doing here, what had happened, and I tried to explain. But as I did, they gave me that, "Are you out of your mind?" look. So I just stopped myself. They took me back to my campsite, and I packed everything up without saying a word to my wife. She asked over and over again about what happened, but I couldn't tell her, not after the way those rangers looked at me when I told them, and if she did believe me, she would never go outside again. I researched a bit about my encounter, leading me to a thing called the Dog Man. If you're ever out in the woods of East Tennessee, watch out for it. It's definitely real. Also, make sure your gun is loaded. Thank you for letting me share this story. I haven't shared it since then. Feels good to get it off my chest. I pray you all stay safe out there. Incidents in Nebo and Possum Point. From Levi. I live in Louisiana. Over the years, I've had several unsettling experiences in the woods near my family's property. These incidents have led me to believe there might be something supernatural lurking in the forests of Nebo and Possum Point. It was a dark night when my cousins Marty and Lorelei, Marty's friend Blaine, and I were playing our own version of Manhunt in the woods in front of our Nana's house in the rural hills of Nebo. In our version, you hide and seek in groups, and when the seekers get close, you can sneakily try to change hiding positions. Marty and I were on a team, searching for a hiding spot. We came to a part of the forest where all the trees were obviously planted, due to their eerie straightness and alignment in rows. We settled down with our lights off, but soon started to hear rustling and running around us. Keep in mind, there were only dead leaves on the ground, no bushes or anything to hide behind other than trees. As we heard the walking around us, we started to look around with our flashlights, probably calling out to Lorelei and Blaine. Marty swore he saw something small flash past his light. We figured it was Blaine, hunched over, since he was a small guy. We continued to look around with the lights, seeing nothing. Marty texted Lorelei and Blaine to ask where they were. That's when we knew something was wrong. Blaine was at Marty and Lorelei's house up the hill, along with their dog. Lorelei said she was on the porch at Nana's. Besides, she was always known to be really tall for her age, so we wouldn't have missed her running past us. When Marty got the texts back from the two, we looked at each other with the whites of our eyes popping out. It wasn't Lorelei. It wasn't Blaine. It wasn't the dog. There was no sign of a deer or coyote as we scanned the woods. Whatever this was, it was very, very fast. As soon as we looked at each other in surprise, we both had a mutual understanding of what to do next. We shot out of the woods as fast as our feet would carry us. A few years later, when we were teenagers, my cousins and I started going out to the bridge and the oil-filled roads to drink and smoke weed. One night it was myself, my cousin Jaden, my friend Gage, and maybe our friend EJ. We liked to walk the dirt roads by the pumping units and look at the night sky. We had a designated spot on top of this hill in a big area where all the trees were cleared out. It gave us a great view of the night sky. As we walked back to that spot, I was slow and cross-faded, so I dragged behind, weaving from side to side. When we got back to our spot, I believe it was EJ who told me, "Gage is tripping." He looked at me and pointed at you, saying he thinks Levi is a skinwalker. I thought it was funny how high he was. But one day I was talking to Gage about that and making fun of him, and he corrected me saying, "No, I didn't think you were a skinwalker. I saw one behind you." He swears he wasn't that high, and he was genuinely scared. To think that something could have been right behind me, and I had no clue, is quite chilling. My sister Georgia takes after me when it comes to some things. For example, she likes to walk the dirt roads at night. Or at least, she used to. She's not into folklore and stuff, so she has no reason to make this up. She doesn't even know about skinwalkers. One night I was staying at my parents' place in an even more secluded area, near Nebo, called Possum Point. I convinced Georgia to walk with me that night and smoke a blunt. She had this sort of reluctance though, and I eventually said to her, "I thought you liked walking out here at night." She explained, "I used to, but not really anymore." When I asked why, what she told me had me surprised. She said she had been walking the same road one night with the outside cat. The cat meowed, but then she heard a second meow behind her or off in the woods in front of her. There was only one cat at her house at the time. It was like the second meow was an exact copy of the cat. She went right back to the house after that. Upon telling me this, I immediately told her what I thought. I know about skinwalkers. I know that the stories say they can mock animal sounds and even people's voices. I told her that I think that might be what's out there. I don't think these incidents are coincidences. They all happened in the same general area of a few miles. The place has always had a mysterious feel to it. I can't help but wonder if there's something out there. I still camp out in the area to this day. Who knows, maybe one day there will be more to this story. Or maybe I won't come back from those woods. Figures of the Past. From Frank. When I was younger, I immersed myself in a lot of fiction and read many books above my age level. Whenever I shared experiences with my family, they struggled to believe me, explaining it to be my overactive imagination. However, from my childhood, roughly age 6 to 12, a few distinct experiences stuck out. They all happened in this creepy old house that looked straight out of a horror movie. And I mean it. Creaky floors, dirty, shadowy walls, and one big old cotton willow that stood guard, as I liked to believe as a child. To give these experiences more depth, I should explain the layout of my old house. It was a big 2-story house with a basement and a subcellar. When you walk by the staircase, there's an office with a bathroom at the end of it. The door to the living room is to the right side of the staircase. Behind that is the kitchen with a dining room and glass sliding doors leading to the deck. On the left side of the kitchen was the front entrance. Our yard was that of an old farm. It had a huge 2-story shop, which we were always repairing vehicles in. And to the side were 3 small granaries. Opposite the granaries was a quonset, which for those who don't know, basically looks like a grain bin on its side with a couple of doors in it. My first experience happened on my way to the office one night. I had always had an eerie feeling around that old office. It was like I could sense a presence, but it never showed itself. However, late at night when it was dark, I had to go to the bathroom, and there was no upstairs bathroom where I slept. I crept down those rickety old stairs and was just going through the dimly lit, dusty old office, which we didn't use, by the way. My dad was a farmer, not a businessman. As I was creeping through, I heard a whisper. However, it was a weird whisper, almost like a female, but at the same time male. One person, but also many people surrounding me. I looked at the far end of the office and saw 3 shadowy figures. They just looked back, as if surprised at the breach between my realm and theirs. As a few seconds ticked by, it was like we all finally processed each other's presences. And then, with the slightest whispered shrieks, the shadows came at me. I locked myself in the brightly lit bathroom It did not come out until my mother woke me from the cold tiled floor the next morning. My next experience happened in my upstairs bedroom. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. One of them had a small walk-in closet. The other had 2 walk-in closets that ran the length of the room on either side of it. The room with the 2 closets was mine. One night, not too long after the shadowy figures incident, I awoke to what sounded like a woman's scream outside. Now, at the time, I lived in rural Manitoba, whereas now I live in northern Alberta. So I knew it wasn't a cougar or anything like that. I thought it might have been a fox's mating call, as I know they sound like humans in distress. However, I got out of bed to check, just in case. As I walked over to the one window in my room, a sudden chill ran over me. This extremely uncomfortable sensation that I was not alone upstairs came over me. I second-guessed myself and eventually peeked past the curtain. Just then, 2 sharp raps, sounding as if someone was in either closet, knocked once firmly on the wall at the same time. At that, I was well and truly spooked, so I leapt from my bed and pulled the covers over my head. Just then, what felt like a long bony finger poked the underside of my mattress 3 times. Fed up and shook out of my mind, I ran to seek shelter in my brother's room, which was the other room upstairs. After I entered that room, I felt safe once again and slept like a baby. My most disturbing experience I saved for last, like all good things should be. On the north end of our yard is a decent-sized dugout. One day, my cousin X, for the sake of privacy, and I were out one night exploring. As we were walking by this dugout, we heard a loud splash. We were fairly sure that there was no aquatic creatures or ducks, as we'd never seen them on the dugout before. After all, it is quite dirty due to the previous owners dumping old cars in it. We were spooked, but I went back to the house and grabbed a large scythe. After that, X and I felt quite protected. A little later, we were exploring some of the granaries I mentioned, when a loud splash from the left distracted us for a few seconds. I told X to stay behind, as I investigated with my scythe. Once I got there were no noticeable disturbances. I started to head back when X ran out from the cluster of granaries, and he said one word once our eyes locked. Run. I dropped the large scythe and booked it back to the house with him. Once we were comfortably safe under the covers, X told me what happened. He was in the first granary of the cluster, screwing around, waiting for me to finish my search, when he heard what he thought to be my voice from 2 granaries over, telling him to come and check something out. He had timidly peeked around the door and started creeping towards that granary, but then a subtle movement caught his eye. It was a pale, dry, bony hand receding into the 3rd granary's door. After witnessing this, he barreled out of the granary, meeting me in the yard. The next day, when we went out there to get my scythe back, which I had dropped in our frantic dash back to the house, it was missing. I never did find that scythe again, even after countless hours of mowing and cleanup. That's all the stories I have. If anyone hears this and can explain these happenings, leave a comment. Thank you for your time. The Skinwalker of Alberta. From Druid 4T6. I still remember the chill in the air that autumn evening in 1998. It wasn't just the cold seeping into my bones. It was something else. Something unsettling. I'd ventured out alone into the forests of northern Alberta, Canada, on countless occasions before. The wilderness called to me, offering solitude, peace, and a break from the monotonous routine of life back in Edmonton. I thrived on that quiet, until that trip. I'd heard whispers from locals about strange things happening in these parts. They spoke of spirits, hauntings, and something else, something old and dark. They called them skinwalkers, which by now I'm sure you're familiar with. The road was thrown around by the indigenous folk, a creature that could take the form of animals, a shapeshifter born from witchcraft. I didn't believe in such things. At least I didn't then. I had decided on a weekend trip to a remote cabin deep in the woods. It was perfect, isolated and serene, far away from civilization. I'd planned on some light hunting and maybe getting a few good shots with my camera. I packed light, bringing along a rifle, some food, and enough gear to last a couple days. The drive to the trailhead took me about 4 hours, and by the time I started to hike, the sky was already painted with the hues of dusk. The trees closed in around me, towering and thick, branches interwoven like skeletal fingers. The forest was still, only the sounds of my boots crunching on the leaf-strewn path and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. I should have arrived at the cabin before dark, but the trail was more difficult than I'd anticipated, and the sun was rapidly sinking below the horizon. As I pushed further into the woods, the silence became unnerving. Normally, the forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds and squirrels, the occasional rustle of a larger animal. But tonight there was nothing. It was as if the woods were holding their breath. Every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, quick and light, but whenever I stopped to listen, all I heard was wind. It was full dark by the time I reached the cabin. The place looked like something out of a horror film, an old weathered structure made of dark wood, its windows broken, and its door hanging slightly ajar. A part of me considered turning back, but I was too tired to trek back to my truck, and the nearest town was miles away. I lit a fire in the old wood stove, the crackling flames providing a small sense of comfort. The cabin felt oppressive, like the very walls were closing in on me. But I tried to shake it off, just nerves. After eating a quick meal, I settled into my sleeping bag, hoping that sleep would come soon. It didn't. The wind outside began to pick up, howling like a wounded animal. The trees creaked and groaned, branches scratching against the side of the cabin. I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, trying to will myself to sleep. And that's when I heard it. At first, it was a soft rustling sound, like leaves being disturbed just outside the cabin. I thought maybe a raccoon or deer had wandered by, but then the rustling turned into distinct footsteps, heavy, deliberate. They circled the cabin, slowly, as if something or someone was stalking me. I held my breath, listening intently, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, a low and guttural breathing, just outside the door. My heart pounded in my chest, and I grabbed my rifle, clutching it tightly. The breathing grew louder, more labored. Then came a scratching sound at the door, like nails dragging across the wood. Suddenly, there was a knock. 3 loud, deliberate knocks. I froze. Who could possibly be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? The knocks came again, followed by a voice. "Let me in." It was my voice. I jolted upright, staring at the door in disbelief. That voice was identical to mine, but warped, twisted somehow. "Let me in," it repeated. The tone was unnatural, as if someone or something was mimicking me. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I just sat there, paralyzed by fear, gripping the rifle so tightly, my knuckles turned white. The thing outside banged on the door again, harder this time. "Let me in," it demanded, the voice growing more distorted. I could hear the anger, the malice, seeping through its words. I knew then what it might be. The stories I recalled. The Skinwalker. I'd also heard it could imitate voices too, lure prey in by pretending to be someone familiar. Again, I never believed those tales. But now, I had no choice. The knocking stopped, and for a moment everything was silent again. I strained to hear, praying it had gone away. But then I heard footsteps moving around the cabin, and the unmistakable sound of something climbing onto the roof. My heart raced as I looked up, listening to the heavy thudding footsteps overhead. Whatever it was pacing back and forth on the roof now, as if trying to find a way inside. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I knew better. There was nowhere else to go, nowhere to hide. I had to stay quiet, stay still, and hope it would lose interest. Hours passed. Maybe it was only minutes, it was hard to tell. The thing on the roof eventually stopped moving, and the silence returned. But I didn't dare relax. I stayed awake all night, rifle in hand, listening for any sign it was still there. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the trees, I slowly opened the door, rifle at the ready. The forest was calm, bathed in soft morning light. There was no sign of whatever had been out there the night before. But when I looked down, my blood ran cold. In the dirt outside the cabin were deep, clawed footprints, and next to them, a set of human ones. I packed up my things and left that cabin as fast as I could, never looking back. I never spoke of what happened to anyone till now. I'll never forget the voice, or the thing that walked in my skin, trying to get inside. The Eyes in the Woods, from Grimm. About half a year ago, I went to a friend's birthday party. It was a pretty typical celebration in our village, held at a grill but deep in the forest. We always have these gatherings a bit out of the way from the village center, mostly to enjoy the peace and quiet of the woods. The night had been fun, filled with laughter and the smell of grilled meat, which still clung to the cool air by the time I decided to head home. There are two routes to get back to the village. The first is the main road, a bit longer but well lit and safe. The second is a narrow, dark forest path that cuts right through the woods. It's much shorter, and honestly, I've taken it countless times since I was a kid. I've always been comfortable in those woods. That night, I didn't think twice about taking the forest path. Once I left the lights from the grill hut behind, the darkness of the woods swallowed me up. The thick tree canopy overhead blocked out what little moonlight there was, and I pulled out my phone to turn on the flashlight. But as luck would have it, my phone was dead. No battery left. "Of course," I muttered. Luckily, I did have a small keychain flashlight. It wasn't much, but it would get me through. I switched it on and started to walk. The path was familiar, but the deeper I went, the more the trees seemed to crowd in on me. Their branches swayed slightly in the wind. It was quiet, except for the occasional gust making those leaves rustle. The thing is, there had been some talk recently at the local pub. A farmer had mentioned seeing large footprints in the forest. Footprints akin to a dog's, but much bigger. Some thought it might be a wolf. Wolves are rare around here, though. I didn't take the rumors seriously. But that night as I walked, I found myself picking up the pace a bit, mostly because of the chance of rain. At least, that's what I told myself. The path winds near some old castle ruins that overlook the village. It was when I reached that point that I realized how still everything had become. The wind had died down, and the usual nighttime sounds, from the birds and rustling leaves to even the insects, were gone. The only thing I could hear was my own footsteps. It felt strange. Something about the silence put me on edge. I stopped for a moment, and I listened, straining to catch any noise. But there was nothing. Still, I had this feeling, a gnawing sensation, that I was not alone. I swung my flashlight around, hoping to catch some movement in the trees, but the light barely cut through the dark. And then, just at the edge of its range, I saw something. 2 small glowing points in the darkness. Eyes. At first, I froze. I tried to reason with myself. This had to be a deer, maybe even a wild boar. Animals like that are common in these woods. I shouted, hoping to scare it off. "Get out of here!" But the eyes didn't move. They stayed put, fixed on me, staring and watching. I felt my heartbeat quicken. I grabbed a small rock from the ground and threw it in the direction of those eyes. Even so, nothing happened. There was no sound, no movement. The eyes just remained, unmoving and watching me. That's when I really started to feel afraid. Whatever it wasn't scared of me. My hands were shaking now. I tried to pick up another rock, but my hand was trembling so much that I dropped it. The small noise from the rock hitting the ground was enough to snap me out of my frozen state. Without thinking, I simply turned and ran. I ran faster than I think I ever ran in my life, the small flashlight barely keeping me on the path as I sprinted through the dark. The only things I could think about were those eyes behind me and what they belonged to. By the time I reached the hill that leads into the village, I didn't stop. I ran down the slope, only slowing when I saw the first street lamp ahead. Gasping for breath, I stopped under its light and finally turned around. But there was nothing there. The forest was still, quiet, and dark. The eyes, whatever they were gone now. I stood there for a long time, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what happened. Then it started to rain. The cold drops on my skin grounded me a bit, but I couldn't shake the image of those eyes. Could it have been a wolf? That didn't make sense. A wolf would have chased me down easily, and those eyes were far too high off the ground, too tall to be anything I would expect in these woods. Whatever it was, I'll never forget the way it watched me. Dad's Farmhouse. From J. Ion. My dad purchased a small farm on the edge of the woods several years ago. This farm has a tiny farmhouse, which my dad decided to make his permanent residence. However, my mom and sister chose to continue living in the city due to my sister's schooling. So mom and dad made plans to have overnight visits every month. The very first time my sister and mom arrived for their overnight stay, it was in the middle of a heat wave, and Dad had to utilize his specialized sprinkler system for his crops. The land on the farm had been so dry that even the creek flowing next to the farmhouse completely disappeared. Cracks were formed on the dirt around the base of the farmhouse. Dad was very worried about the weather taking a toll on his crops, so he watched the Weather Channel after dinner, while my sister and mom went into separate bedrooms to get ready for bed. My sister was lying on her mattress, texting a friend, when she heard footsteps. Initially, she thought that Dad was done watching TV and was getting ready for bed too. But when she heard the footsteps repeatedly shuffling between her bedroom door and Mom's, she thought it was very strange that Dad didn't open the doors or knock. So she got up and opened the door to take a look. The moment the door opened, the sound of shuffling footsteps stopped. she saw Dad, who was still in front of the TV, already sound asleep and snoring away on his recliner. Mom's door was shut, and it didn't look like Mom had left the room. She closed her door and laid back down on her mattress. Just as she was about to text goodnight to her friend, she heard those shuffling footsteps again. This time she realized that the footsteps sounded wet, like someone who got their clothes and footwear drenched at the beach and was making that moist pitter-patter on dry, solid ground. She turned to look at the gap under the door, and with the illumination from the ceiling light outside, could see shadows from a pair of feet that were rapidly shuffling themselves back and forth between my sister's door and Mom's. She got up to open the door again, but like the first time, the footsteps stopped immediately, and all she saw was Dad comfortably snoring in front of the TV. There was no footprint, wet or dry, and no one else but Dad and her. She called out to Dad, trying to wake him up, but Dad was in such a deep sleep, he just continued snoring. My sister felt a little freaked out, so she shut the door, laid back on her mattress, and pulled her blanket over her head. She called her friend to talk so that she could drown out the sound of those footsteps and to provide soothing company until she fell asleep. The next morning, my sister asked Dad if he had heard anything during the night. Dad said he had heard nothing because he slept so soundly all through the night. She then asked if Dad had ever experienced anything strange while living in the farmhouse. But Dad said no. In fact, that farmhouse was the most peaceful place he'd ever lived. Then she asked Mom if Mom had heard anything, to which Mom also said she'd heard nothing despite being a light sleeper. When night fell, my sister decided to not go to bed after dinner. Instead, she wanted to accompany Dad in watching the Weather Channel so that she could stay awake to see what was making those footsteps. Just a couple of hours later, Dad, as expected, fell asleep on his recliner while watching TV. Mom had already gone to bed. My sister sat next to Dad, fully alert, watching and waiting for anything unusual. Then, she heard those quick, soggy footsteps. However, this time, the footsteps were coming from the kitchen. She turned to peek into the kitchen, and to her horror, she saw a very tall, pitch-black figure pacing back and forth on the kitchen floor. She described it as so tall, it almost reached the ceiling. It was really skinny, like a stick figure that had been stretched out, with a narrow head that had no facial features at all, except for pitch blackness. Whatever ghost, monster, or entity that was, it just hastily paced back and forth in the kitchen, making those sopping wet footfalls. It didn't pay any attention to my sister, nor my dad. My sister, with her eyes still on the mystery figure, grabbed Dad's shoulder to try to wake him. But Dad just didn't budge. He stayed asleep and kept on snoring, as though he was in a drug-induced slumber. She then ran into my mom's room. Surprisingly, Mom, who has been a light sleeper her whole life, did not stir at all when my sister entered. Mom remained sound asleep, even when my sister jumped onto her bed. My sister kept her eyes on the bedroom door for the rest of the night, refusing to shut her eyes until sunrise. When morning came, my sister begged Mom to bring her home. Dad was disappointed because they were supposed to stay another night and help out around the farm during the day. My sister, who has a serious neurological disorder, told Mom and Dad that she was not able to sleep at all in the farmhouse, thus putting her health at risk. Eventually, Mom relented, much to my sister's relief. It has been several years since my sister witnessed whatever that was in my dad's farmhouse kitchen. My sister refused to spend the night at my dad's farm, no matter how late it got during their visits. She never told Mom nor Dad because she didn't think they would believe her. To this day, Dad lives in the farmhouse. So far, he has never reported anything spooky nor strange. Even when Mom stays overnight with Dad, Mom never experiences anything out of the ordinary. So, Darkness fam, what do you think that was? Hallucinations? Hauntings? Heat stroke? A portal to hell? Hysteria? Let me know. Multiple strange occurrences. From PAnonymous. Allow me to begin by giving you an idea of the surroundings of where I live. I live in the country in Pennsylvania. Most people on my road have a lot of property, so you can't really see the neighbors' houses. One can't see my home from the road, as I live up on this steep hill. Our drive is steep too, long and winding. Once at the top of the drive, it opens up and our house sits at the back of the property. A huge field is behind it, and a small mountain beyond that. There are woods on the other 3 sides of the property with 5 acres of yard before the woods. Also, we have a big garage to the left, facing the house, about 30 feet away. All of these strange events occurred over a 2-week period in July of 2021, with the exception of the fox incident. One night I drove up my driveway after work, just as the sun was setting, and I parked along the yard in front of my house. As I got out of my car, I began to hear a lot of banging noises, which stopped me in my tracks. It sounded as if someone was throwing rocks or bricks at the back of the garage, as hard as they could. I couldn't see back there from where I was parked. This went on for maybe 30 to 60 seconds or so, then just stopped. I stood there frozen, unsure of what just happened, then took a few steps toward the back of the garage and said, "Hello?" No reply, no sound at all. It was dead silent. I ran inside to get my dad, who was 93 at the time, but in good shape, to see if he would go check it out with me. When we slowly walked back there with a flashlight in hand, we saw and heard absolutely nothing. No rocks, no bricks, nobody out there, no sign that any disturbance had occurred at all. As I was looking around after my dad went back inside, a Pearl Jam song that I had just had on my radio as I drove up the driveway started to play, and I could not find the source of the song. It stopped, and then everything went silent. I mean, absolutely no sounds of crickets, frogs, or any of the usual summer noises. A couple of evenings later, I was sitting on our front porch, having a cigarette and coffee, when suddenly, it sounded like a stampede of about 50 to 60 cattle or horses was coming right towards me. I leapt up out of my chair and fell right down on my butt, with my pack of cigarettes flying one direction, coffee and lighter the other. I quickly got up, as it sounded like the stampede was getting closer. I looked around to see, of course, absolutely nothing. I grabbed my cigarette while I yelled out an expletive. Then I ran inside and peered out the screen door. The sound instantly stopped. 3 or 4 evenings later, I was outside once again, and I heard this humming type of noise, which began to grow and increase in volume. It seemed to be coming from the sky from the field behind the house. It grew louder over the course of about 20 seconds or so, until it was coming from over my head, and once again from behind the garage. There are 4 big old trees back there, and when I looked up, I saw what appeared to be some type of triangle-shaped aircraft. But it wasn't solid. It looked as if it was almost invisible, kind of like something one would see if looking way under deep water, with waves distorting it. It looked like it was moving through the tree branches. It was big, like the size of a jet, but I couldn't really see all of it all at once. I could loudly hear the humming as I watched it move slowly through the branches. It was all over in maybe just under a minute, and all was normal again, as if nothing ever happened. A few nights after that, I was driving home after dark at about 11 p.m. I was approximately 4 to 5 miles from my home, driving past another part of the big cattle farm behind our place. Something bright red caught my attention out of the corner of my left eye. I turned to look and saw about 2 to 3 feet above and over a large field of grass what looked to be a grid of red laser lights across the entire field. I looked up to see if it was coming from something in the sky, but I didn't see anything up there. My daughter said she saw the same thing a couple of nights later at the same time of night and in the same exact place. This next very strange occurrence happened about 1.5 years later. Over the winter, I had begun to feed dog food, dog treats, and leftovers to 2 foxes I often saw on our property. Foxy, a red fox, and Neo, a fox with a patchwork coat of tans and browns. One day as I was watching to make sure Foxy ate her food, a bright white beam of light came down around her and seemed to pull her up onto her hind legs. She began to sway back and forth and kind of around. I could see her abdomen. She appeared stuck as if she could not break free from that pose. A purplish-colored light came down kind of in the center of the white beam of light, and she began to be lifted up, then suddenly vanished into thin air. Gone, just like that. I couldn't see anything from which the light came. No aircraft or anything of the sort. And I never did see that fox again. These are my very strange and crazy occurrences that I've been wanting to share for a long time now. I'm very interested to see what listeners think. Is it another dimension I'm experiencing, as veils are thin? Did a portal open up? What about the invisible aircraft, the grids, and poor old Foxy? I truly hope she's okay. I wonder who or what took her. I'm so anxious to see your responses. And again, every one of these things really happened. Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. If you're not already, follow and listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating while you're at it. Get some cool creepy merch at eeriecast.store. Check out my other show where I narrate scary work stories. It's called Tales from the Break Room. For more terrifyingly entertaining shows from EerieCast, go to eeriecast.com. And if you want to listen to Unexplained Encounters and all the other EerieCast shows without pesky ads, sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. You'll also get exclusive access to horror audiobooks only available to EerieCast Plus members. And you'll get 20% off our EerieCast.store merch through our members-only monthly discount code. Finally, if you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.